up the main arteries of every city in the country, and you'll see how low-rise they are. So it's not going to be a kind of major problem.
All right. Okay, so looking around the world, just a final point, places like Oregon and Minneapolis City Council, they've opted to do something quite interesting. They've opted to end single-family zoning entirely. Now, that means, so those large cities, big diverse cities, they'll allow triplexes to be built anywhere. What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't do that here because we're a much lower density area. And, my key thing is these arguments often come down to kind of like there's one solution or one size fits all. No, let's have a range, let's have diversity, because we're a super diverse city in Auckland in terms of cultures and where people want to live in terms of family size, blended families, all that sort of thing.
Okay, Bill Mackay, lecturer from the School of Architecture, thank you very much. And we do apologise for that slightly thorny line, but do you agree with what he says, Sally?
I do, yes. Yeah. Yep, diversity.
Okay. Speaking of housing density, what happens when a neighbour's laundry gets all up in your grill? A fierce debate over dirty laundry is heating up in Hobsonville Point in Auckland. Some residents are furious about washing being hung out to dry on lines rigged up outside homes. Apparently, it's against the rules of the Hobsonville Point Residents Society. Washing lines can't be visible from the street unless approved by a committee. Now, anyone who owns a property in the area must, by law, be part of the society and follow its rules to remind their tenants to do so as well. Outside and out of sight, or in the dryer is the suggestion. Gary McCormick.
This represents the worst kind of society that I don't want to be part of. In fact, I'm going to quote a wonderful line by James K. Baxter. There are some places in New Zealand that are run by men who lie awake at night worried someone's going to steal their faeces.
Okay.
Take that in.
So,
that's very funny. Well, let's laugh if you like. It sums up something. It sums up a condition that there are people around New Zealand. There are people, sadly, still, and it's not the 50s anymore from the last century, who do worry about things to the point where they worry about somebody else's washing being on the line. I mean, seriously, we've got more important things to worry about. And besides which, if I lived in a suburb like that where they had rules like that, I would have my washing over the roof, on the fence, on my car, everywhere I could put it. Who the hell thinks that they can run a society like that?
You're a professional disruptor, Gary McCormick. That's what you are. There's a time and a place to toe the line. And living in a nice suburb that people want rule. They don't want to see Gary's undies. I don't want to see your undies.
What would you put on it, Gary? What sort of things would you get from your house?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, but you've got to always take a step back and say to yourself, what sort of people lie awake at night worrying about the neighbours' washing being on display? There's your problem.
Sally Winley, what do you think? You drive past a house and what do you see? Washing.
Oh, it's quite interesting, though.
And smalls.
See what they've got. Crikeys, that makes it a bit entertaining.
That's a good point.
Well, it's still a free country, just.
It is.
Sally Winley, Gary McCormick, thank you very much for a very, very energetic Mondays panel. And thank you very much to Ali Ventura for putting the show together. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow at 3:45 sharp. Checkpoint is next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haeriaki nei, an electrical fire grounds more than 35 flights and forces our air traffic system into backup mode. A man's charged with murdering a Christchurch builder more than 2 years after he disappeared. Radiographers walked off the wards today. It'll be the same again Wednesday. So what happens if you need an X-ray or a scan? Our biggest banks commit to trialling regional hubs and put the handbrake on any further branch closures outside of cities. A West Auckland neighbourhood's airing its dirty laundry literally, and that's got a few people in a spin. Ireland goes down to Japan, so does that make the All Blacks' job harder or easier? And wanted, a thief with a belly full of pork on Great Barrier Island. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. 4 handguns and about 100 bullets have been found by police officers investigating 2 deaths in a house in the Christchurch suburb of Burnside early today. The District Commander John Price says a man in his 80s and a woman in her late 70s were found dead on a bed after a call was received from an elderly man about 4 o'clock. He says the Wairakei Road address wasn't known to police.
However, at this stage, we understand that there has been regular medical assistance provided to an occupant. We currently have a team of 12 dedicated investigators and specialists working on this inquiry. What I will say to you is that this is an absolute tragedy.
John Price says no one else is being sought in relation to the deaths. The Transport Ministry is apologising for treating legitimate submissions opposing the car tax rebate scheme as spam. It's assuring those who made submissions via the National Party that their views will inform its advice to the Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
In July, Ms Genter sought feedback on subsidising lower-emitting cars by levying higher-emitting ones. Yesterday, Nationals leader Simon Bridges accused her of gagging people opposed to the scheme because only 500 of the 1,500 submissions sent through his party's website had been accepted. Today, the ministry's chief executive, Peter Mercy, promised a thorough assessment of how the submissions came to be flagged as spam. He says he's writing to Mr Bridges to personally apologise for the mistake. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
A person has been arrested over threats that put the police on high alert in Wellington and Hutt Valley this afternoon. The Corrections Department says multiple bomb threats were made against its staff and the police were told immediately. They were called to 4 addresses, 2 in Lower Hutt and 2 in Wellington City at about 1:30. Ben Strang has more.
A corrections vehicle near a probation office in Wellington's Adelaide Road was searched and cleared of any explosive devices. The department's Lower Hutt Service Centre was also evacuated, but later cleared. The police were also called to Parliament, which was searched and cleared, and a cul-de-sac in Taita. It's understood the threats were made via email and that the sender has been arrested. Ko Ben Strang tēnei.
The Canterbury District Health Board says it has now contacted all close associates of a dance teacher who died from meningococcal disease. 26-year-old Kelsey Davidson, who ran the Radical Step dance studio, died on Thursday. A medical officer of health, Cheryl Brunton, says all her close contacts have been identified and given antibiotics as a precaution. A long-time friend of Ms Davidson, Nadia White, says her death is a huge shock to the Christchurch dance community.
Oh, it just came on so suddenly, and yeah, she was just in class and teaching and not feeling well, and then a few hours later that was the end. It was so sad to hear.
Nadia White says Ms Davidson was a vibrant and bubbly person who was uplifting to be around. More than 2 years after the disappearance of a Christchurch builder, the police have charged a man with murder. When 49-year-old Michael McGrath went missing in May 2017, his family said his disappearance was completely out of character. Today, Detective Inspector Kylie Shah announced that after 2 years and 4 months of tireless investigation, a 51-year-old Christchurch man has been charged with murdering the missing Hallsville man. He is expected to appear in court tomorrow. A Foxton airstrip owner says one of the 2 men killed in a light plane crash in the Porirua Ranges was on his last flight before getting his full pilot's licence. The wreckage of the plane and the bodies of an experienced flight instructor and his student have been found to the east of the rugged range north of Wellington. Kevin Roberts, who owns the airstrip where the pair were doing practice manoeuvres yesterday, says even the most experienced pilot would struggle if they got into difficulty in those mountains.
The Porirua ranges are pretty unforgiving and cloud can come in very, very quickly and you can get caught out. But if something does go wrong, it's very unforgiving country.
The police are examining the crash scene and the Civil Aviation Authority will investigate.
The Bankers Association says the country's biggest banks are working together to find a sustainable solution for regional communities. 6 of them are trialling regional hubs in Opunake, Martinborough, Stoke and Twizel for 12 months, starting from early next year. The hubs will provide basic banking services with a support person in attendance and have multi-branded smart ATMs. The association's chief executive, Roger Beaumont, says this level of collaboration is a real first.
When a bank leaves a small community, that's quite a psychological blow for that community. And the reason banks have been leaving some of these small regional towns is because they're not viable. What this is about is working collaboratively and providing a solution for the residents in those communities.
Roger Beaumont says the banks have also agreed not to close any branches outside main centres during the trial. Smoke from a power supply system at Christchurch's Air Traffic Control Centre caused all domestic flights around the country to be briefly grounded this afternoon. Airways, which operates the air traffic control system, says the radar and communication systems went into backup mode, but it decided to take a conservative approach and stop all departures. 36 planes were grounded for about 45 minutes while the problem was sorted. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 5. Bowden, Geordie and Scott Barrett will become the first set of 3 brothers to start for the All Blacks at a Rugby World Cup when they take on Canada in their Pool B match on Wednesday. Atumoli, Liam Coltman and Angus Ta'avao make up the front row. Patrick Tuipulotu will partner Scott Barrett in the locks, and Matt Todd, Shannon Frizzell and Kieran Reid are the loose forward trio. TJ Perenara is at halfback, Richie Mo'unga at first 5, and Sonny Bill Williams and Jack Goodhue are the midfielders. Rico Ioane will start on the left wing, Geordie Barrett on the right and Bowden Barrett at fullback. Samoa can take a major step towards reaching the final stages by beating Scotland in Kobe tonight. Japan's upset win over Ireland has thrown Pool A wide open with Samoa and the host nation, the only 2 remaining unbeaten teams. However, coach Steve Jackson admits the suspensions of Ray Lilo and Motu Matu'u have been a major distraction to their preparations.
I'd be lying if I said it hasn't had any impact. It certainly has. Emotionally for the 2 players that had to go through what they went through, and then obviously to try and not only pick them up but also pick up the group. But it's given every motivation for this group of 23 to go out there and do a job.
Steve Jackson. The New Zealand canoe slalom team has qualified 3 boats for next year's Olympics. Luca Jones has secured spots in both the women's K1 and C1, while Jack Danjan has won a berth in the men's K1. That's the news.
A missing plane?
No emergency supplies that we're aware of, and probably just wearing their normal casual clothing.
A new chapter.
The Wahinis want to go forward with their loved ones or whatever their movement is. Hey, they'll get 100% for support. So when it comes to, our Mongo patch, sorry, out the door, where you go.
And refereeing woes.
I don't know anymore, I don't know the rules anymore. Honestly, don't know the rules anymore.
Blowing the Whistle morning report weekdays from 6 a.m. on 101 FM, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, calls to regulate rental property managers. Do they go far enough? And after 10, Professor Clemency Montel on what maths and language reveal about ancient culture and society. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine today apart from isolated showers. Frequent showers tomorrow, possibly thundery with hail. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Periods of rain or showers, sometimes heavy. Tonight, isolated thunderstorms tomorrow with hail. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Scattered rain clearing this evening. Rain or showers return tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms and hail from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough, showers clearing tonight but returning tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms and hail about Nelson tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla and Westland, occasional rain or showers clearing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, occasional rain, turning to showers tomorrow morning. Snow lowering to 400 metres tonight, becoming fine later tomorrow. For Southland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail, turning to rain tomorrow evening. Snow to 300 metres for a time overnight. Chatham Islands, a period of rain tonight, a few showers tomorrow. RNZ National. It's 5:09.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. 36 domestic flights across the country were grounded today and 3 flights forced to land as smoke and a fire alarm put the country's airspace into lockdown. Airways, the company controlling New Zealand airspace, has apologised to passengers after its power supply started smoking and the radar stopped working. The fault happened at 1:20pm when the smoke was detected from the power source in the building where the radar is housed. The chief executive of Airways, Graham Sumner, apologised to travellers and explained what happened.
The alarm was set off by smoke from one of our 2 uninterruptible power supplies, which had failed. Therefore, our radar and communication system reverted to backup system mode. With the system in backup mode, Airways was able to continue to safely manage domestic airborne traffic, and we took a conservative approach to managing New Zealand's airspace. This included halting all departures within New Zealand airspace. Our airborne international flights were not affected, as our main oceanic control centre is housed here in Auckland. Most importantly, I want to emphasise that the safety of the travelling public was not in any way impacted. At 2pm, we had identified the cause of the issue being one of our 2 uninterruptible power supply units, and by 2:15pm, Airways operations were running normally on main power supply, with backup and normal operations have now resumed. I just want to apologise to both our clients and all the travelling public for the disruption that was caused today. Naturally, we regret that, but the safety of the travelling public is our primary concern. And as a result, we hope that people can understand that the actions we took today were necessary to ensure that that took place in an orderly way. Are there any questions?
So how many flights were actually affected?
So there were 36 flights that were affected by an average of 50 minutes, and there will be some flow-on delays as a result of that, but certainly by the end of the day, the network should be up and running and operating as normal.
Graham Sumner says the hour delay was due to a partial evacuation of the building. He says fire and emergency were called, but couldn't say what caused the power supply to smoke.
We've identified the problem and we have the normal level of resilience restored in the network. So certainly we'll always want to know why something like that has happened. But what I can tell you is we have an enormous amount of resilience built into the network. So I am pleased that all of those backup systems and all of the processes that we have in place have worked as we would have expected. We don't design these things in a way for any of these failures to occur, but the way to build confidence in an environment like this is to make sure you've got plenty of backups, plenty of resilience, so that we can ensure the safety of the travelling public. Those 36 flights were the ones that were delayed. I understand there were 3 other flights that had to turn around and land again. So that's the extent of the disruption.
And that's Graham Sumner, who is the Chief Executive of Airways. The country's biggest banks have announced they will be trialling regional hubs and have shelved further closures of branches outside the main centres, for now at least. The government announced today 4 multi-branded hubs will be trialled in Opunake, Martinborough, Stoke and Twizel for 12 months from early next year. It comes after both government and community concern about the closure of banks in small towns. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The regional hubs will be a one-stop shop of basic banking transactions, such as cash withdrawals, deposits and account transfers, and will have multi-brand smart ATMs and online banking facilities. BNZ, ANZ, ASB, Westpac, TSB and Kiwibank will all work together on the 4 pilots. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says this is a positive step for the half of New Zealanders who live outside the main centres.
This is a move that is smart, that is innovative and importantly has community at heart. It makes sense economically and will provide a welcome boost, I'm sure, to our smaller centres.
Bankers Association Chief Executive Roger Beaumont says this level of collaboration between the banks is a real first.
When a bank leaves a small community, that's quite a psychological blow for that community. And the reason banks have been leaving some of these small regional towns is because they're not viable. What this is about is working collaboratively and providing a solution for the residents in those communities.
Mr Beaumont says the hubs will also have an on-site support person that can help with transactions and direct people to things like relevant call centre numbers. Finance Minister Grant Robertson described the initiative as fantastic and says he's confident these hubs will be more than just glorified ATMs.
We can't turn the clock all the way back here. What we can do is make sure that people in regional New Zealand get access to the kind of banking services they need on a day-to-day basis.
Grant Robertson says he doesn't think banks will use these hubs as an excuse to close down more branches further down the track.
I don't think so. I think what we're seeing here is a genuine attempt to make sure that there are services available in our regions. As you know, the nature of banking is changing and that is the reality of life. But no, this is a genuine effort by all involved.
South Wairarapa Mayor Viv Napier says the pilot is welcome news for Martinborough, which saw its last bank branch close last year.
If you're going to Masterton to do banking as a business, it's 40-45 minutes there. Do your banking and then 40-45 minutes back. So that's quite a bit of time out of a day to just have to do something like putting cash in or getting cash out.
Ms Napier also hopes a banking hub will attract even more people to the town.
It will draw people in as well. If you're tossing up between somewhere, if you're maybe moving to a rural area, you're tossing up between somewhere that's got those services and hasn't. Now, that might be the thing that gives you the big tick.
And Viv Napier hopes people follow the maxim, use it or lose it, so that regional banking hubs can continue past the trial stage. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It's 16 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about the regional banking hubs there. Would that make a difference to you? What are services like in your town? Because obviously this is a trial in some specific locations. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A flying student who died in a plane crash in the Porirua Ranges was only one training flight away from getting his pilot's licence. The man died with his instructor when the light plane went down after taking off from Foxton yesterday. And as Hamish Cardwell reports, the flying community is reeling just months after another flying double fatality shook nearby Wairarapa.
The experienced pilot and a trainee on his last training day before becoming certified died yesterday after crashing into the rugged Porirua Ranges. Wreckage of the plane was found early this morning in mountainous terrain after it was reported missing at 8 p.m. last night. Police have spoken to the men's families, but their names have not been released. Kevin Roberts owns the Foxpine airstrip in Foxton, where the pair had been doing practice manoeuvres yesterday before flying away. He says the pilot was an expert flyer, but even the most experienced aviator would struggle if they got into difficulty in those mountains.
The Porirua Ranges are pretty unforgiving and cloud can come in very, very quickly and you can get caught out. But that we really don't know because we weren't there. But if something does go wrong, it's a very unforgiving country.
The region was previously rocked by a double flying fatality in June when 2 men died in a mid-air collision near Masterton. Mr. Roberts says it's awful the tight-knit flying community has been hit again by tragedy.
Oh, it definitely is tragic for the aviation community, but this one is... It's not as though two aircraft hit each other, it's the fact that something's gone wrong. If he had had any sort of a chance to be able to land it, he would have. And the aircraft was very modern, so something's obviously gone wrong.
Alan Jones, who keeps a plane at the Foxton airstrip, says local pilots won't fly for a time as a sign of respect to the deceased.
And that's our way of supporting, I guess. We just don't fly for 2 or 3 days, and it's just like a big flying community. It's a big family.
The Mayor of Hobsonville, Michael Fayen, says the crash is a terrible blow for the men's loved ones.
Well, I feel very sad, but it would be nothing compared to the families of the 2 men that have passed on. And so, obviously, on behalf of the Porirua, I'd like to pass on our condolences, sincere condolences. Just all the best to the families involved and whatever we can do here in the Porirua.
The police say the scene of the crash is being examined and the Civil Aviation Authority will investigate the crash. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell aho.
Police have described the death of an elderly couple found dead in their Christchurch home in a suspected murder-suicide as an absolute tragedy. They received a call at 4 this morning from an elderly man who threatened self-harm and said he possessed a firearm. After the caller gave his address, the line went silent, and then police heard a loud bang. When the Armed Offenders Squad and the police negotiation team arrived at the Burnside house, they found an elderly man and woman lying dead on their bed next to a gun. Alicia Foon reports.
One neighbour who was asked not to be named says she pulled her curtains this morning to find Armed Offenders Squad members walking around outside her home. The mother of two was asked to stay inside.
That was so weird for me because I wasn't sure what's going on there and I was so scared. It's the next door and I don't know what to expect.
The woman says while she didn't know the couple well, they were always friendly. Another neighbour, Dave Williams, says he was woken by the sound of distraction devices being used by the Armed Offenders Squad. He says he could not believe they were targeting the home belonging to the couple.
I heard them drop, I'm assuming it's a flashbang, just at the back of the house. Yeah, and a bright flash and just basically like a decent sized fireworks going off. And then the bullhorn started saying, that's not us coming in, but that's us giving you a warning that we are having, we do have the house surrounded and we could come in.
Mr Williams has known the couple for the 12 years he has lived on Wairakei Road and says they were always ready with a wave and a greeting. He says the magnitude of what has happened is still sinking in.
So yeah, we know each other and look after each other, and some obviously as normal you don't normally see them every single day, but yeah, at least you know names. Some neighbourhoods probably don't even know the names of the neighbours, let alone the neighbour's neighbour. That was a shock. Yeah, you can sort of feel sorry for what actually has happened. So yes, not nice, is it really?
Canterbury District Commander Superintendent John Price says a homicide inquiry has been launched after the body of a female in her late 70s and a male in his 80s were found on their bed next to a firearm. He says the police found 4 handguns in the house along with 100 bullets, and it's believed one of the deceased was a legal firearms owner.
We currently have a team of 12 dedicated investigators and specialists working on this inquiry. We will hopefully be in a situation tomorrow where the cause of death can be confirmed through a post-mortem. I can say that this address is not known to police. We have not been to this address previously.
But he did say one of the pair was receiving regular medical assistance.
This is an absolute tragedy that we have 2 persons that are now deceased. And it is a reminder to us all that we need to care for each other. We need to care for our neighbours and we need to care for the wider community.
The police say they are not looking for anybody else in relation to the deaths and are contacting the next of kin. Ke o totahi aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Alicia Foon, tēnei.
The police have just finished a briefing following the arrest of a man for the murder of Christchurch builder Michael McGrath. Michael McGrath, who was 49 when he went missing, was last seen in May 2017 at his Hallswell home. His disappearance led to a high-profile investigation into his whereabouts, with his family saying his disappearance was totally out of character. Today, the police announced a 51-year-old man has been charged and is expected to appear in court tomorrow. Our reporter Anand Zaki has been at the briefing and joins me now. Kia ora, Anand. Tell us what's the latest from the police?
Hi, Lisa. Well, I can actually confirm to you that the 51-year-old man charged with murder will, in fact, appear in court tomorrow morning. The police have also confirmed, critically, that Michael McGrath's body is still missing and yet to be found. The police says that they are committed to finding his body, and they also conducted 2 search warrants today in relation to the investigation.
Have they given any clues to what led to the arrest, given that they are still looking for a body here?
Yes, they did indicate that some key evidence or key developments came about in the last month or so, but they're still remaining very tight-lipped about other details of this investigation as it is now before the courts. But otherwise, they said that the family was informed, the family of Michael McGrath was informed of the upcoming arrest last night, and that they have also requested privacy.
Put this in context. It is a long-running investigation, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. 2.5 years it has taken for the police to reach to this arrest. Now, earlier today, Detective Inspector Kylie Shah says that while Michael's family were realistic that he would not be found alive, there was a likely small part of them that hoped they were wrong. She says those who were close to Michael will be grieving and processing today's arrest. And she says because there is a judicial process, there will be no further details about this. Now, this case, a lot of the investigation centred around a close childhood friend of Michael McGrath, a former prison guard, David Benbow. Now, police are not confirming any details about the investigation in terms of who they have arrested, but a lot of the investigation did tie in with David Benbow.
Thank you very much for that. That's Anan Zaki reporting there after the police press conference to announce they have arrested someone and charged them with murder over the disappearance of Christchurch builder Michael McGrath. The All Blacks have made a raft of changes to the team to play Canada in their second Rugby World Cup pool match in Oita on Wednesday with an entirely different front row, midfield and wings. The three Barrett brothers, Bowden, Scott and Geordie, are all in the starting 15, making them the first set of three brothers to start for the All Blacks at a World Cup. Meanwhile, host Japan produced arguably the second biggest World Cup upset when they beat Ireland 1912 in the stunner in Shizuoka on the weekend, with Pool A now anyone's for the taking. Joe Porter is in Beppu and joins us now. Hey Joe, so 11 changes to the team. Tell us some more.
Yeah, that's right. 11 changes. Not unexpected, of course, with the team wanting to rotate the squad between this game and Namibia in just 4 days' time, and, of course, giving some guys a rest after what was a fairly bruising encounter with South Africa, and giving some guys who haven't had a lot of game time, namely wings Rico Ioane and Geordie Barrett, centre Jack Goodhue and second five Sonny Bill Williams, just a bit more game time under their belt in preparation for what's coming further in, or later in the tournament. Yeah, Atu Moli, Liam Coltman and Angus Ta'avao, completely new front row, and again, this is just about getting these guys experienced with the conditions over here on match day, experienced with the pressure that comes with the World Cup and the atmosphere that surrounds it. Shannon Frizzell gets a start at number 6, blindside. He's been rushed into the squad, of course, as an injury cover, so that's a special story for him. In fact, there are 16-odd players making their World Cup debuts against Canada, so a very special game for many people in this team, and a chance for some guys to, I guess, show their wares after having been pushed out of the team earlier in the year due to performances of others.
Joe, we don't want to be overconfident, but playing Canada, what's that like? A bit of a training run?
Yeah, pretty much. Let's be honest. Canada looked very, very poor against Italy. They were beaten by about 40 points in their opening pool game. Canada, unfortunately, look like they've gone back in the last few years rather than forward. So it really will be a training run. In fact, I think some of the All Blacks training runs, in-house ones this week, will have been a lot harder than this Canada match. You'd expect the All Blacks to put at least 100 points on these guys, and perhaps Mark Ellis's record of 6 tries in one Rugby World Cup game against Japan, of course, back in 1995, could well be under threat, with Rico Ioane, former World Breakout Player of the Year, coming back into the team and looking to, I guess, show what he's capable of after being overtaken by the likes of George Bridge and Sevu Reece. So we're looking for a big game from Rico Ioane on the wing for him to recapture the form and recapture the title as the best winger in the world. And yeah, perhaps someone will break Mark Ellis's record, which didn't look possible at the start of this tournament.
Hey, what about last night? Wales and Australia. Okay, so the match, great, but some would say marred by the refereeing. Is there a bit of a theme there, or people being oversensitive about it?
No, I think unfortunately it is developing as the theme of the World Cup, is this over-officious refereeing. Look, we know that World Rugby has a directive to protect the head of players' concussion, being one of their sort of major, I guess, focuses over the last few years, and really these refs are under an enormous amount of pressure to get things right. World Rugby came in, said after the first weekend of Rugby World Cup matches that the referees didn't have great performances, so the referees are feeling it, and there were some bizarre calls last night. I mean, you look at the TMO 10 minutes after the incident had happened, coming back and pinging Samu Karevi, the Wallaby centre, for leading with an arm into a tackle. It was just shocking tackling technique from the Welsh first five, Reece Patrick, that got himself into that position, yet somehow the attacking player was penalised. I mean, we're not playing some tiddlywinks here. This is a game where physical strength and violence is really quite overt, and it's part of the game. And unfortunately, we're getting to the point, a tipping point perhaps, where World Rugby are losing their identity with the game. They're not quite sure what's happening, and it's affecting the performances. The refs are under pressure. They're not quite sure how they're supposed to react. And yeah, we saw some pretty bad calls. That was, of course, called up after 10 minutes after the play had gone past, but they wouldn't even go back 10 seconds to check if the Welsh halfback was offside when he scored an intercept try to really turn the match in Wales' favour. So some very inconsistent calls. Michael Cheika and Michael Hooper, the Australian coach and captain, blowing up after the game saying, what are we supposed to do? Are we not supposed to run with the ball anymore? How are we supposed to run into contact? Are we supposed to just go in and to let them tackle us? What are we supposed to do? This is rugby. And Michael Cheika was equally furious about some of the calls at scrum time. It just seems to be an absolute lottery when it comes to scrum penalties. One goes the other way, one goes another. There's no consistency. And the referees have been copping, a bit of a hiding from all angles, I'm afraid, when it comes to this. And unfortunately, it seems to be developing as the overarching theme of this World Cup is some strange officiating and, referees not having the confidence to do what they normally would, and strange calls when anything comes near the head.
Joe, thanks for that. Joe Porter reporting there from Japan, and we'll be hearing from Joe a lot over the next few days. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, airing your dirty laundry in Hobsonville, and Sparks' broadcast of last night's Australia-Wales Rugby World Cup thriller sparks more complaints. And guess who's coming to dinner? A thief. The mystery of a missing pork roast stolen from an oven on Great Barrier Island. Can't wait for that one. Text us on 2101 about anything you've heard on the program today. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Susanna now with the headlines.
The police have found 4 handguns and about 100 bullets while investigating 2 deaths in a house in the Christchurch suburb of Burnside early today. The District Commander John Price says a man in his 80s and a woman in her late 70s were found dead on a bed after a call was received from an elderly man about 4 o'clock. He says the Rugby Road address wasn't known to the police and describes it as an absolute tragedy. The Transport Ministry is apologising for treating legitimate submissions opposing the car tax rebate scheme as spam. It's assuring those who made submissions via the National Party that their views will inform its advice to the Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter. Ms Genter sought feedback 3 months ago on subsidising lower emitting cars by levying higher emitting ones. Yesterday, Nationals leader Simon Bridges accused her of gagging people opposed to the scheme because only a third of the 1,500 submissions sent through his party's website had been accepted. A person has been arrested over threats that put the police on high alert in Wellington and Hutt Valley this afternoon. The Corrections Department says multiple bomb threats were made against its staff, and the police were told immediately. They were called to 4 addresses at about 1:30. The Porirua Ranges, where 2 pilots died in a light plane crash, have been described as unforgiving. The wreckage of the plane and the bodies of an experienced flight instructor and a student have been found to the east of the rugged range north of Wellington. Kevin Roberts, who owns the airstrip, says even the most experienced pilot would struggle if they got into difficulty in those mountains. A man is expected to appear in court tomorrow on a murder charge more than 2 years after the disappearance of a 49-year-old Christchurch builder, Michael McGrath. His family says his disappearance in May 2017 was completely out of character. Today, Detective Inspector Kylie Shah announced a 51-year-old Christchurch man has been charged with murdering the missing Hallswell man. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time now for business news with Madison Reedy. This is an interesting one, Madison, given we're deep in the throng of the Rugby World Cup here.
Sticking with rugby?
Yeah, sticking with the theme. Sky TV is fighting to keep the rugby rights. What's it saying about that? Because I imagine that's a pricey prize.
It is a pricey prize, and we still don't know who'll be the winner of this prize either. So, as you said, Sky Television came out today and said that it is in talks with the Sanzar Rugby rugby body to buy the rugby rights that they sell for the next 5 years at a cost of minimum $235 million. Now, these rugby rights cover the test matches between New Zealand, Australia, Argentina and South Africa. It includes Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship, and also some British and Irish Lions tours in there too. Now, Sky actually has held these particular rugby rights since 1996, and the only reason it actually disclosed that it is in talks to buy these rights this time around is because its market value has shrunk so enormously over the past year. So in the past 12 months, its market capitalisation has shrunk 39% to around a record low share trading price of $468 million. Now, the Companies Act requires any company that's going to do a deal of more than half the size of its total market value to require shareholder approval. Now, this really does in a way sort of show Sky Television's vulnerability at the moment. It's basically having to ask shareholders to give it the green light to do its usual business because its market cap has shrunk so much. And it has basically said that these Sanzar rugby rights are not a want but a need. And I quote what it said today in a market announcement when it announced this deal. It said that failing to acquire the next Sanzar rights, arguably the company's most important content asset, represents a significant threat to the shareholder value of the company. And that's because the company has been synonymous with rugby and sports broadcasting and production in New Zealand. Now, on the flip side of that, if it cannot secure these rugby rights, its debt to earnings ratio will reduce, and that will force extra obligations on it to provide more information to its banks that it borrows money from. We should say here, though, that it's obviously facing increased competition in the sport broadcast space in the company Spark, which obviously outbid it for the Rugby World Cup rights, which it's broadcasting on Spark Sport at the moment. And we can all but guarantee that Spark is likely in the running for these Sanzar rights too. The fact that it bought Rugby World Cup, you'd expect it to want these ones too, but it just doesn't have to talk about it. So I asked Spark today if they were in the running. They cited commercial sensitivity pretty quickly. But we can say that Sky probably will not roll over easily and give this one away to Spark. The new chief executive of Sky, Martin Stewart, has already publicly said that anyone who tries to outbid it for rights to sport again, they'll try and send them home broke.
Oh, this could get messy. Watch that space. So you've got a new tourism report that's out, and there are some particular threats facing the sector?
Yeah, this is a report from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Within it, it basically said that tourism is no doubt a major contributor to New Zealand's economy, but it did list a number of headwinds for the sector, most notably the fact that international visitors to our country have already flatlined and are starting to drop off, and that's expected to worsen and actually slow further as the global economy slows down too. Another reason being that we are so far away, obviously, to the rest of the world, so we do have to sell New Zealand extra hard to tourists to encourage them to come all the way to our neck of the woods. Another issue is about actually when they do finally get here, and that's because New Zealand is obviously lacking infrastructure, particularly in Auckland. We have a huge infrastructure deficit, and they've said that that can and has already created some tension between locals and tourists. We've had issues crop up like freedom camping and the safety of foreign drivers, and this report says that hostility created around those sorts of issues could ruin our reputation as welcoming and friendly Kiwis.
That's interesting. Have they said anything about whether people are, if there's any sort of air miles embarrassment involved here? Because that's an issue these days.
I was just about to get to that one. It's called flight guilt. So
is that what it's called? Okay.
Well, I think that's what it's dubbed. I think I've heard a New Zealand coin that term before, so I think that makes it flight shame. We could use that one too. So yeah, well, obviously with this whole, trend of climate change, growing internationally, this idea of, flight shame and flight guilt is seeing more people take less flights, or in fact not fly at all, or in fact just significantly reduce the length of their flights, which means they wouldn't be as keen to fly all the way to the land of the long white cloud.
Yeah, and that's a hard one to counter in some way. Hey, what else has been going on the markets today?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up a whole 0.8% tonight, so that's a rise of 89 points to close at 10,926. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 62.7 US cents, 92.7 against the Australian, and 51 British pence. Our dollar drifted ever so slightly lower today, and that's because business confidence fell a further 2 points last month.
Thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with our business news. Now, residents of one of Auckland's newest communities are getting into a spin over their neighbours' laundry practices. Several complaints have been made to the Hobsonville Point Residents Society over washing being hung up where it's visible from the road. Some say it makes the plush new area unsightly, while others think those bothered by it need to get a life. Reporter Matthew Tunison and cameraman Nick Munro went out to Hobsonville to see what's got everyone in such a lather.
On the rapidly expanding streets of Hobsonville Point, the undies and tea towels flapping in the sea breeze are causing a schism, albeit a very minor one. Everyone who lives here has signed up to a set of rules which stipulate that permanent or temporary washing lines shouldn't be visible from the street, and some residents don't like to see the rules being broken. People want their properties to look good, but is hanging laundry really that much of an eyesore? Hobsonville Point Residents Society member Lindsay Dawson says some people certainly think so.
But it's a really polarising thing. I mean, we've got Laundrygate going on here now in, quite a ridiculous way, really. You're not the only news media people who've been to us.
Most of the houses here are brand new, built over the past 8 years or so to cater for the city's growing population. Ms Dawson says it's not uncommon for densely populated areas to have such a rule. However, she fully understands why people would want to hang their washing up outside rather than using a clothes dryer.
There's this huge move towards sustainability now, and lots of people don't want to be spending their dollars on electricity when there's a nice, breeze outside. And so one can easily understand why they want to do that, especially if they've got families. If you've got 3 kids or 4 kids or something, the cost of putting washing through a dryer is considerable, and then people have environmental concerns.
At the local nail salon, San Bennett couldn't quite believe anyone would have a problem with a bit of washing. She asked where people without a backyard were expected to hang their washing.
I think it's ridiculous, to be honest. Where else are you supposed to hang out your clothes? If you've got no backyard, I think they need to get a life, to be honest, because, there's more things to complain about, more things that are more important than who hangs their laundry outside their house.
Among the other residents RNZ spoke to, opinion was divided pretty much down the middle.
It's a hard question, actually, because everyone has different opinions. Me personally, my opinion is that I don't like to view my undies to everybody else. And it's a personal choice. I mean, just hanging your bras and panties out, it's not, to me, it's a little bit too in your face.
That's a bit ridiculous. We all wear clothes. We all got to wash them. We all got to hang them somewhere. Don't look at people's washing lines. I don't know.
Where do you hang your washing?
On a clothes rack outside, but
out front sometimes?
No, from now on I'll be putting it out front.
No, I can understand it.
Do you have a washing line at home?
Yes, but mine is not out in the front. Mine's round the back, but people can't see it because I don't suppose. No, I live in a body corporate here.
You wouldn't dream of having it out front?
No, I wouldn't. Wouldn't dream of it.
Lindsay Dawson says community members will be able to raise the issue at the Residents Society's annual general meeting on October the 13th. Up until this point, the spat has been taking place on social media.
Most of this is erupted on Facebook, and so Facebook is a great place for people to say I love that idea or I hate that idea, and they all have a go and everyone has their say, and this is just a sort of a social media laundry storm, really.
In the meantime, she offers her assurance that no one will be tossed out of Hobsonville Point for hanging up their washing on the line, and she's confident it'll all be ironed out soon. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunison, TNA.
Oh, I know you've got something to say about that. Get in touch by text 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. What do you reckon? Should you be allowed to hang your washing out front where people can see it? We're asking people to live in more and more compact areas. What's the other choice? Chucking it in the dryer? Who can afford to do that? Anyway, let us know what you think. It's caused a debate here in the control room. Director says he hangs his stuff in the garage because it's guaranteed to get dry in crappy Auckland weather. Let us know your thoughts. And a hospital emergency doctor says today's radiographers strike has caused the most risk to patients out of all the other health sector strikes this year. Most public hospitals were under intense pressure caring for patients without access to x-rays and scans. Hundreds of radiographers belonging to the Apex union walked off wards early this morning in a day-long strike. That will be repeated on Wednesday. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
More than 9 out of 10 hospital patients need an X-ray or scan, but today from North Cape to Bluff they were reserved for urgent cases only. The head of Hawke's Bay Hospital's emergency department, Mark Barlow, says it's a major concern.
Probably 95% of patients who end up getting admitted to hospital will have an X-ray or a scan of some sort within the first 24 hours of their admission. The strike defers the imaging for a large number of patients, which makes definitive decision-making harder.
He says it also means less efficient care and more patients waiting in beds that are already in high demand. But Dr Barlow says his biggest worry is the risk it poses to patients.
From my perspective, this is the biggest risk to patient safety that we have seen in the midst of all the health-related industrial action that's gone on prior to this. I think we were able to provide the same level of care through the other strikes, but this one really takes away an important imaging modality that we use on a daily basis for patients.
DHBs say the strikes are part of a coordinated campaign by several health workforce groups to leverage more pay than others doing the same or similar work in other unions. The union has rejected that charge, but either way the pressure was also on at the large Canterbury DHB today. Its Chief Medical Officer, Sue Nightingale, says restricted access to a range of x-rays and scans meant they've had to reschedule 400 non-urgent outpatient radiology appointments today and a similar number for the strike on Wednesday. She says about 10 operations also had to be postponed.
So it's a huge impact on our patients and a huge impact on our staff with all the contingency planning that needs to happen. It affects clinicians, it affects managers, it affects our admin staff. But most significantly, it creates delays for patients which we just cannot catch up with.
Dr Nightingale says it's another blow during a tough year with the mosque attacks, the junior doctors' strike and a major flood at the hospital.
We're still behind in seeing significant number of outpatients, and we're behind in some of our elective surgery. It gets to the point where it's just not possible to catch up.
The Chief Medical Officer at the Dunedin-based Southern DHB, Nigel Miller, says some major operations have also been delayed there.
I haven't spoken to them personally, but I think if I were them, I would feel quite disappointed and frustrated that, because it's working up towards that type of major surgery is a big thing, and then to find it's delayed at the last minute must be very distressing.
The DHB's National Contingency Planner, Anna Aitchison, says most DHBs needed to call in radiographers today under special life-preserving services agreements between the union and DHBs before the strike for emergency care.
This works the way it's designed to work. This is part of the preparation that needs to take place for the 2 weeks before any period of industrial action, and ensuring that we have backup when we need it.
Hospitals stress those needing urgent care will still get it at public hospitals. Apex Union couldn't be contacted for comment. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brown aho.
And Apex has since got back to us. The National Secretary of the Apex Union, Deborah Powell, says the union is happy with how today's strike played out and says strikes will continue until DHBs come back with, quote, a decent offer. It is about 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A searing night of civil unrest has plunged Hong Kong into lawlessness ahead of celebrations to mark the 70th anniversary of communist rule in China tomorrow. In acts of defiance not seen for weeks, hundreds of thousands of protesters stood their ground and stared down police attempts to control them, ignoring volley after volley of tear gas and rubber bullets. The ABC's Greg Jennett spent the night on the streets in central Hong Kong.
Truth told, audiences are surely jaded by the endless protests in Hong Kong these last 18 weeks. That's understandable. But there's a determination, a commitment being shown here that's democratic in nature, communist in its collective call to common cause, And as Beijing's analysis now goes, it's all way beyond the capacity of the Hong Kong police to handle.
What we're dealing with here is the aftermath of a rare tactical victory for the protesters. Only moments ago, the police were lined up directly behind me, but no amount of tear gas fire, and there was plenty of it, would repel them.
Emboldened, sending a message to Beijing, perhaps the scale of what happened last night was immense. Symbolised by the black-clad young man who tore down and burnt a prominent sign in the city centre, advertising the 70th anniversary of communist rule in China. Protesters led police around the block for hours. They set fire to things. To our eyes, it often looks like wanton vandalism. And some we spoke to view the concept of violence as abhorrent.
We don't mean to be very violent or fighting with each other. No way.
But the numbers, always in the tens and hundreds of thousands, speak loudly. This movement doesn't stop. It doesn't dissipate. Protesters are gassed, they're arrested, and they come back for more. Why? Well, lawyer and democracy leader Benny Tai, just released from a stint in jail, has a clear understanding of the motive, even if he doesn't agree with it.
They also find that there's no future. Not that they cannot have their own house, that kind of future. It's even the political future and whether they can live in a free society anymore. That is their worry. And so some of them may consider that this is almost the last battle.
It's a battle, to be sure, and it rages still. It will today, tomorrow, and beyond that National Day of Communist celebration. All we're left to ponder is how and when the victory or the peace is won.
Greg Jennett on the streets of Hong Kong. Let's go to the UK now, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson has again put himself on a collision course with Parliament, insisting Britain will leave the EU at the end of October in spite of the law introduced by MPs to prevent a no-deal Brexit. On the first day of the Conservative conference in Manchester, Mr Johnson refused to explain how he would bypass the new legislation should he fail to strike an agreement with EU leaders in time. Norman Smith reports.
Boris Johnson today waved away the prospect of Parliament thwarting his do-or-die deadline, insisting he could, of course, circumvent the so-called Benn Act passed by MPs to block no deal. Mr Johnson gave little away about how, but didn't rule out the possibility of using emergency powers under the Civil Contingencies Act to override the measure, or relying on EU legislation to challenge it. Mr Johnson, however, did appear to rebuff the suggestion he could resign rather than agree to any Brexit extension. Speaking on the BBC's Andrew Marr programme, he said it was time to deliver on Brexit.
The best thing for the country and the best thing for people's overall psychological health would be to get Brexit done, and that's not just I who think that. If you look at the where the public is, where people are, whether they voted leave or remain, they really think that it's up to Parliament now to get this thing over the line.
Mr Johnson was also unrepentant over his use of language, claiming many of the phrases that had sparked controversy were tried and trusted metaphors, and that to ban certain words would impoverish our language and diminish parliamentary debate. He also said he'd been a model of restraint. But Mr Johnson did offer this partial apology over his use of the word humbug in relation to the threats faced by female MPs.
I can certainly say sorry for the misunderstanding, because absolutely. Okay. But my intention was to refuse to be crowded out from using the word surrender to describe the Surrender Act. And I hope you've got that. No.
Meanwhile, the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has criticised the Speaker over his handling of Brexit and accused him of damaging the standing of the Commons. Mr Rees-Mogg was also asked about the possibility opposition MPs could oust Mr Johnson and replace him with a caretaker Prime Minister.
It's a Ramona coup, isn't it? It's to try and frustrate and stop what 17.4 million people voted for. And the comeuppance they will get if they defy the electorate will come in the ballot box when we come to a general election.
In public, Boris Johnson and senior ministers continue to insist they're hopeful of securing a Brexit deal. Increasingly, however, it appears their minds are turning to the looming showdown with Parliament over no deal and how to outmanoeuvre the so-called Rebel Alliance.
Norman Smith at Westminster. Well, we've got a tasty little morsel for you. We like to call it the mystery of the missing roast. A long-time Great Barrier resident and chef Tim Andrews lovingly cooked up a pork belly at home on Friday afternoon. But then something went very wrong. I asked him to tell me the story.
So it was me that was preparing the pork. I had thought it would be a nice idea. I was at home and decided that cooking off some nice pork belly and that and bringing it round to my partner's place for dinner was a good idea.
Wow, so two pork bellies, was it? Or
Yeah, it was 2 small pieces of pork belly that I just bought down from at the shop.
Yeah.
And over here, things aren't exactly the cheapest things to buy.
So that would have cost you a pretty penny then to start off with? About how much?
Yeah, well, the pork belly itself, that was probably about around $32 to $35.
Okay, so talk us through your technique here. Do you baste it or what's your...
I slow cooked it for about 3.5 hours. So it was got a nice bit of crackling on top and nice and tender meat underneath.
So about what, 180 degrees for those 3 hours or a bit of a lower temperature?
I normally have it covered in tinfoil for the first couple of hours. It was about 180 to 200 degrees. And then after that, I took the tinfoil off and baked it off at about 250 to get a nice crackling on top.
Oh, okay. Now you're talking. And did you have a bit of veg chucked in there with it too?
Yeah, I had made up a nice sweet potato and potato a la creme, which is layered potato.
A la creme? Whoa, you were going the whole hog.
Yeah, well, being a chef by trade, I thought I may as well use a bit of my techniques.
Brilliant. And so, how far off was this to being finished? Did you wander off during the process or something, or...?
No, everything actually had been finished. I had done a nice braised red cabbage to go with it, and it was just, after I cooked it, brought it round to my partner's place, and we decided, I just put it on the bench, covered in tin foil.
Letting it rest? Yeah,
letting it rest while we just took the dogs for a walk. So the dogs got out of the house for a bit of a run around, so we went down, probably left the house for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours.
Right, so you wander back, and what happens?
Wandered back, and I thought, okay, well, I'll check on the pork, and, it was sitting on the bench, so I thought, okay, well, I might sneak a little piece off it and have a nibble. And I lifted up the tinfoil and just found the roasting tray empty.
The horror.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock horror to both of us. We were kind of stunned and didn't know what to do. We just ended up having a bit of a laugh and realised that, no, the pork was actually gone.
Both pork bellies, greedy devils.
Yep. Yeah, whoever it was obviously didn't like vegetables because they had left that still sitting on the bench.
Really? Had they? What about the crackling? Had that gone as well?
Yeah, every part of the meat part was gone. The pork, the crackling.
So suspects, Tim? Got any suspects? Anyone with an engorged belly?
I wish I did have any suspects, but at this time we haven't been able to come up with anybody. All our neighbours haven't seen anything, and the island's quite a free-spirited place where people come and go, so nobody really locks up anything here. The barrier community was always here to look after each other, so it's kind of a shock to us all, really, that somebody's come in to a home and just taken the main part of dinner.
That's pretty brazen. Did they take off with anything else? You know, was there any beer in the fridge that would have gone nice with the pork that disappeared as well?
No. All the beer in the fridge was still there. Nothing else had been touched. It was almost like they had already cooked their own vegetables and needed some meat.
Wow, this is an amazing mystery, isn't it? Maybe it was the waft of the sweet smell of your pork that had been slow basted at about, 180 for 3 hours that led them to the house.
Yeah, well, they obviously got scent of something wafting around because It was quite surprising that none of the vegetables had been touched. They were just quite interested in the pork.
Did you finish off the veggies?
Yeah, we ended up, that night we just ended up cooking some 2-minute noodles for dinner and had the vegetables with some roast lamb the next day.
And that was Great Barrier resident Tim Andrews, and he says if the greedy person who pinched that pork wants to leave a couple of beers on the back porch, he'd be grateful for the exchange. Some feedback now from you all about hanging your washing out. This is the fracas in Hobsonville about people displaying their washing. This person says, washing smalls, if you wear grandma pants or your tighty whites have permanent tan lines, hang them round the back. If you're unconcerned what others think, hang them where you like or just go commando. Suits me most of the year, they say. Someone else says there's a billboard in Wellington encouraging us to dry our washing in the free, fresh air. Tanya says, and this is a good point, that some of the issues with drying your clothes outside are that a dryer is not usable for reasons of fabric sensitivity, merino synthetics. She says, I've had a dryer for 7 years, never used it. And 2, women who live alone or are elderly rarely put their underwear and bras outside. It's a risk for stealing and advertises who lives there as a potential target. Good point, Tanya. Someone else says the body court rule about drying washing, this is the rule that says you can't put it out front where people can see it, is petty, and that in this era of global warming, then we shouldn't be using dryers. And this one which is very interesting, doesn't sign their name, says, my wife has big bloomers, and whenever she hangs them out, the neighbours lose their view. And my name, they say, didn't say.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. 4 handguns and about 100 bullets have been found at a house in the western Christchurch suburb of Burnside, where the police are investigating 2 deaths early today. The District Commander, John Price, says a man in his 80s and a woman in her late 70s were found dead on a bed after a call was received from an elderly man about 4 o'clock. No one else is being sought in relation to the incident, which Mr Price describes as an absolute tragedy. He says the Aviation Road address wasn't known to the police, but an occupant had received regular medical attention. The property remains sealed off. The Transport Ministry is apologising for treating legitimate submissions opposing the car tax rebate scheme as spam. It's assuring those who made submissions via the National Party that their views will inform its advice to the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter. In July, Ms Genter sought feedback on subsidising lower emitting cars by levying higher emitting ones. Yesterday, Nationals leader Simon Bridges accused her of gagging people opposed to the scheme because only 500 of the 1,500 submissions sent through his party's website had been accepted. Today, the Ministry's Chief Executive, Peter Mersey, promised a thorough assessment of how the submissions came to be flagged as spam. He says he's writing to Mr Bridges to personally apologise for the mistake. The Prime Minister has given the Regional Economic Development Minister a telling off for his comments at a forestry conference earlier this month. Shane Jones said that if the sector liked the money it was getting through the Provincial Growth Fund, it should back him and his party New Zealand First. The National Party has described the comment as outrageous. Jacinda Ardern says Mr Jones will be taking the Cabinet manual with him during his parliamentary recess.
It's an acknowledgement that his language should be much tighter, particularly when it could be construed that he is speaking as a minister. Indeed, my expectation is that that kind of language just isn't appropriate, particularly when you're at a function where those who are in attendance will believe that he is there as a minister.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The agency in charge of the country's airspace has apologised for the disruption of flights this afternoon. Smoke from a power supply system at Christchurch's Air Traffic Control Centre set off an alarm at 1:20 and Airways grounded all domestic flights as a precaution. Its Chief Executive, Graham Sumner, says the problem has been sorted.
There were 36 flights that were affected by an average of 50 minutes. And there will be some flow-on delays as a result of that, but certainly by the end of the day the network should be up and running and operating as normal.
Graham Sumner. Airways says international flights were not affected because their air traffic controllers independently managed from Auckland. An unqualified counsellor has been slammed by the Mental Health Commissioner over the way she dealt with a boy's threats to stab his mother. She has been asked to apologise to both of them and undertake training in de-escalation if she wishes to resume practice. Sarah Robson has more.
Commissioner Kevin Allen says during a counselling session, the 8-year-old boy said he wanted to hurt his mother. The counsellor responded by asking him what he would use to do it and made a comment about using some nearby scissors. The counsellor restrained the boy and he was pushed into a chair. The counsellor says she was trying to teach the boy empathy. The police were called. Mr. Allen says the counsellor told him her training to counsel children was having children of her own. The counselling profession is not regulated by law, and Mr. Allen has also written to the Ministry of Health with his concerns about this. Ko Sarah Robson, Aho.
A planner for the 20 district health boards says most of them have had to call on striking radiographers today to provide urgent x-rays and scans. Radiographers who are part of the Apex union walked off the job at all public hospitals today in a row over what they say is a lack of progress in pay talks. Under life-preserving services agreements made before the strike, DHBs can call on striking staff to provide x-rays and scans in acute or emergency situations. The DHB's National Contingency Planner, Anne Atchison, says most boards have done that today.
This works the way it's designed to work. This is part of the preparation that needs to take place for the 2 weeks before any period of industrial action, and ensuring that we have backup when we need it.
Contingency Planner Anne Aitchison. The death of a man in the Manawatu township of Bunnythorpe is now the subject of a homicide investigation. Since the man's body was found at a house on Friday, the police have been trying to piece together what happened. A post-mortem done yesterday revealed serious injuries, but the police have declined to go into detail. In Christchurch, a 4-year-old child has been fatally hit by a forklift. The police say the child received medical attention but died this afternoon at the scene. A residential property in Robinson's Road, Prebleton. WorkSafe has opened an investigation. Pharmac says it won't fund taxis for those standing down from driving because they switched epilepsy medication. From tomorrow, the agency will no longer fund the drugs used by 95% of people with epilepsy, instead paying for only one generic drug. The Transport Agency says some of those using the new brand should also voluntarily stop driving for 8 weeks. Pharmac has been called on to fund taxis for those affected, but a spokesperson, Lisa Williams, says that won't happen.
Those kind of expenses aren't really within Pharmac's scope, but one of the things that we have done is said to general practices that, some of their patients might want to come back and have additional appointments with them to discuss concerns about the change, or they might need some additional support. So we've said to GPs that they can waive the patient's visit co-payment and that Pharmac will reimburse the GP directly for that.
Lisa Williams of Pharmac. It's coming up to 6:30. The All Blacks have made sweeping changes to the team to play Canada in their second Rugby World Cup pool game in Oita on Wednesday. The front row, midfield and wings are entirely different. Rugby reporter Joe Porter is in Bepu at the All Blacks Hotel.
Atu Morley, Liam Coltman and Angus Ta'aval start in the front row, with Patrick Tuipulotu coming in at lock alongside Scott Barrett. Shannon Frizzell starts at blindside in his World Cup debut, with Matt Todd at open side and captain Kieran Reid at number 8. TJ Petanata starts at halfback, with Brad Webber making his World Cup debut from the bench. Sonny Bill Williams and Jack Goodhue start in the midfield in a straight swap for Ryan Crotty and Anton Leonard-Brown. Richie Mwonga and Bowden Barrett remain at first 5 and fullback respectively, but Rico Ioane and Geordie Barrett get a run on the wings, with George Bridge and Sevu Reece left out of the matchday 23. Ben Smith and Adi Savia provide cover from the reserves. In Bepu, this is Joe Porter.
Leon Hayward is trying to emulate one of New Zealand hockey's best recent imports. The former Kookaburras goalkeeper has been named in the Black Sticks men's squad for the upcoming 4-test series against Japan. Hayward says he's hoping to make a similar mark to Grace O'Hanlon, who has become a mainstay of the women's side after crossing the ditch.
I've heard a lot of stories about Grace doing well over here, and we had another boy come over a few years before her called Hamish McGregor, who was in my junior Aussie group, and he did the same sort of thing and played a bit. So it's happened quite a lot.
New Black Sticks goalkeeper Leon Hayward. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the sport of gold panning with Amanda Jane Woodhouse, where you can still win even if you come second. Depending on the price of gold, of course. We have a window on the world of stress in the farming sector because it's not just Fonterra that's struggling. And there's an update from the team which brought you the award-winning cold case true crime podcast, Gone Fishing, because there's been developments. On Nights with Anna Thomas, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, fine tonight apart from isolated showers. Frequent showers tomorrow, possibly thundery with hail. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Periods of rain or showers, sometimes heavy. Isolated thunderstorms tomorrow with hail. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, scattered rain clearing tonight. Rain or showers returning tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms and hail from tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson and Marlborough, showers clearing tonight but returning tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms and hail about Nelson tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, occasional rain or showers clearing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, occasional rain turning to showers tomorrow morning. Snow lowering to 400 metres tonight, becoming fine later tomorrow. For Southland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail, turning to rain tomorrow evening. Snow to 300 metres for a time overnight. Chatham Islands, a period of rain tonight, a few showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:09.
Not great weather for hanging out your smalls, is it, Susanna? If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's being urged to do more to crack down on pay for top officials and executives in the state sector. The Finance Minister has already told the chairs of Air New Zealand and 3 state-owned energy companies to keep a lid on directors' pay this year. But one researcher on economic inequality wants limits brought in on what he calls the astronomically high executive pay levels in the public service. Jordan Bond reports.
Inequality and governance researcher Max Rashbrook says there's increasing frustration at pay rates in the public sector, and the government recognises this. At a time when there's record demand for food parcels and a growing wait for state housing, he says struggling workers are dismayed to see public sector executives earning $400,000, $500,000 or $600,000 a year.
Our pay rates at the top of the public sector have got completely out of control, I think, and are far beyond what is justified.
Grant Robertson's message of restraint to the board chairs of energy companies Genesis, Meridian and Mercury and Air New Zealand won't translate to huge savings. For example, over the past 2 years, Air New Zealand's board received pay rises of an average of around $1,500 each, so the total saving would be about $12,000. The company has hundreds of staff earning more than the $270,000 paid to the board chairman.
This move by itself will not drastically change things, but it is absolutely part of a signal that the culture is changing. I think the government perceives the culture as already having changed, and I think it is trying to, at the very least, restrain high pay across the whole of the public sector, and in the long run probably even seek to bring it down a bit, and I think that's a sensible move.
Mr Rashbrook says the government could encourage the dozens of core public sector agencies to look closely at limiting pay increases and funnel the money to those staff paid a lot less. He says saving money would not be the only benefit.
I actually think that trying to reduce the pay imbalance within corporations leads to better performance. I mean, it's widely accepted that probably the biggest driver of whether an organisation is successful or not is the motivation of its staff. And there's pretty good international evidence that staff find unjustified pay imbalances between themselves and management to be demotivating.
But Grant Robertson says his message to Air New Zealand and the others is not a signal for a wider belt-tightening exercise.
These are companies that are generally speaking doing very well. This is simply about the fact that at a director fee level we feel that those fees are about right, and we were just making a clear signal that we didn't see any need for them to be increased. Everybody needs to show fiscal restraint.
All 4 companies have agreed they won't raise directors' pay. Mr Rashbrook says it might be time to look at a chief executive pay ratio in the state sector to ensure no one in a public agency is paid more than 8 or 10 times the lowest paid employee. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
Spark Sport is defending its Rugby World Cup service, saying all but one of the games it's streamed have been without issue. The tournament's New Zealand broadcast rights holder apologised and promised to make changes last week after its streaming service dropped out for subscribers during the first All Blacks match. For yesterday's match between Australia and Wales, the telecommunications company says their platform worked well, as did the country's broadband network. However, some viewers have complained of out-of-sync audio, freezing and two commentaries being broadcast at once for a time. Tom Furley reports.
Competition within the competition to see who can belt out the anthem as well. These two sides favoured to make it through to the quarterfinals.
In another blunder for World Cup viewers, Welsh commentators could be heard under New Zealand's commentary team for 2 minutes after the national anthems at the Australia-Wales clash. Users of Spark Sports streaming service have been quick to lash out about issues with coverage, and after promises its service would improve, many were at it again after the weekend's matches. 76-year-old Mike Muncaster didn't want to miss out, but has so far found his connection in Rotorua glitchy.
Oh, God, turn it off at the wall and turn it on again. I'm forever writing to Spark and complaining.
And he isn't optimistic about things improving.
I'm dreading the quarter-final because I don't believe that Spark will be able to do it.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says in the absence of a smart TV, he's been watching games on his telephone.
Most definitely not happy. And so is my party for free-to-air, where rugby goes, of that level, of that standard, and we're the number one country in the world? Are we for free-to-air? More than we've ever been.
But while people have been frustrated by the streaming service, others like Matt on the West Coast have barely noticed a difference.
I've had no problem whatsoever. I've streamed it onto the TV. I haven't had any hassles on that. And even while I'm been cooking dinner, I've had the laptop out in the kitchen, and while the rest of the house is in watching the TV, and I've been able to watch it on the laptop, and I even had a go at putting it on the phone at the same time just to see if it would work, and it worked on all three.
Technology expert from the New Zealand Tech podcast, Paul Spain, says streaming will inevitably leave some having problems, which he says are likely to continue.
You know, at times we need to go back to the old tried and true of switching something off and switching it back on again to get the right result. Now, I'm sure it's not really what people want to hear, but I think that, you know, that's part and parcel of the changing of technology as we move from our old Sky boxes to being able to, watch things on demand like this through streaming.
He says Spark is dealing with a lot of flack given the importance of the Rugby World Cup for New Zealand audiences. Spark says lag and connection dropouts that some customers are reporting aren't related to their Spark Sport platform and blames device or in-home setup issues. It says so far they have streamed 16 out of the 17 games with no problems on their platform or network, and it's helped a small number of people with device or setup issues. As for the audio problems, it says there was a production issue at TVNZ and it is confident it was a one-off. Today, Sky Network Television announced it is in talks to buy the broadcast rights for Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship. Spark won't say if it is also in the running, citing commercial sensitivity. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of President Donald Trump's top allies say they see no problem with the president's conduct regarding Ukraine, and in particular a July phone call with Ukraine's president that caused the House to move forward with a formal impeachment inquiry. That inquiry gets underway in Washington later this week and looks likely to run all the way until next year's US election. CNN's Sarah Wexford reports.
Allies of President Trump were out in full force this morning defending President Trump and attacking the whistleblower, questioning the whistleblower's motives, as House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff confirmed that there is a tentative agreement between the whistleblower and the committee for that whistleblower to offer testimony. That's something that was backed up earlier today by attorneys for the whistleblower who said they were in contact with lawmakers from both parties, from the House and the Senate, but no date has been set for that whistleblower to come and talk to lawmakers. Now, a top aide to President Trump, Stephen Miller, was accusing the whistleblower of undermining democracy and of being a partisan on Fox News.
The president
president is the whistleblower here. The president of the United States is the whistleblower. And this individual is a saboteur trying to undermine a democratically elected government. The behavior of this individual is close to a spy. I don't know who the individual is. All I know is at some point, Chris, we have to focus on the real scandal. I've worked in the government now, the federal government now, for nearly 3 years. I know what the deep state looks like. I know the difference between a whistleblower and a deep state operative. This is a deep state operative, pure and simple.
Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, is giving conflicting answers about whether he would appear before the House Intelligence Committee. Giuliani is at the center of this Ukraine controversy. President Trump brought him up several times in that now infamous July phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, and Giuliani is mentioned repeatedly in the whistleblower complaint. But this morning, Rudy Giuliani muddied the waters a little bit about whether he would provide testimony to the House Intelligence Committee if President Trump gave him the all clear.
I wouldn't cooperate with Adam Schiff. I think Adam Schiff should be removed. If they remove Adam Schiff, if they put a neutral person in who hasn't prejudged the case, if they put someone in, a Democrat who hasn't expressed an opinion.
You're not going to cooperate.
I didn't say that. I said I will consider it.
You said you wouldn't do it.
You said
you will not cooperate with Adam Schiff.
I said I will consider it. I have to be guided by my client, frankly. I'm a lawyer. It's his privilege, not mine. If he decides that he wants me to testify, of course I'll testify, even though I think Adam Schiff is an illegitimate chairman.
Now, House Democrats this week will be pressuring the administration for documents and testimony. On Friday, they issued a subpoena for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who had already blown through 2 different deadlines to provide documents to House Democrats related to the Ukrainian issue. Now he has a new deadline of October 4th, that's Friday, to provide those documents. And House Democrats are also looking for depositions from senior State Department officials, including former U.S. envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker. He is said to be appearing before 3 different committees this week. So obviously a lot of pressure on the administration this week to hand over some of those papers, some of those testimonies, some of those witnesses that they have been withholding for the past few weeks.
Sarah Wixford in Washington. An exodus is underway in central Papua, where thousands of migrants and non-Papuan residents are trying to flee in the wake of spiralling violence over recent days. Dozens of people have been injured in and around the city of Wellington in central Papua province as tensions between the indigenous and non-Papuan population continue to worsen. Thousands of people have crammed the airport over the weekend trying to escape before any further outbreak of unrest. The ABC's Anne Barker reports.
The attack at Wamena was one of the single worst acts of violence in Papua for decades. Around 30 people were killed there after students went on a rampage in retaliation for an alleged racist slur by a teacher. I saw many dead victims, says this man. School students hit by rocks, then a young Papuan shot in the abdomen from the back. Most of those killed weren't indigenous Papuans but migrants or descendants of other Indonesians who've migrated to Papua in the past half-century. The recent violence has seen ethnic Papuans who largely support independence from Indonesia pitted against those they see as trans migrants from other parts of the country. Many were burnt to death as the students set their shops and houses alight. We had to hide. If we hadn't, we would have died, says this man. We had to climb to the ceiling. Thank God the soldiers came to get us. In the days since, thousands of non-Papuans, as they're called, have fled to the airport, hoping to be evacuated from Wamena, fearful of further violence. The Indonesian military has been ferrying hundreds of people at a time to Jayapura. About 2,000 was still at the airport waiting. We're making 3 flights a day, said Indonesian Air Marshal Tribowo Budi Santoso. From Wamena, we pick up evacuees. But some pro-Papuan activists fear the evacuation of non-Indigenous residents is simply to clear the way for Indonesian forces to mount a major crackdown against the Indigenous population. In the past month and a half, almost 6,000 Indonesian troops and police have been sent to Papua to crush any further unrest. Amnesty International's Usman Hamid says Indonesia must address the inequality between Papuans and non-Papuans and investigate allegations of human rights abuses if it wants to bring the unrest under control.
I'm so worried because I think this is the bloodiest time in Papua, and I have never expected to happen.
The Indonesian government has accused separatist groups of stirring a lasting conflict to attract local and international attention.
Anne Barker with that report. With nearly 40% of Porirua City's population under the age of 25, mayoral hopefuls are making their pitch to the young. But an annual council stock take shows children and young people are struggling and losing faith in the local authority. Last year, a spate of youth suicides raised alarm bells. Young people say they're worried about being shut out of housing, mental health treatment and decisions on combating climate change. Laura Dooney asked some of the mayoral contenders what they'll do if elected.
The 2019 Children and Young People report by the Porirua City Council shows young people are more stressed, fewer feel safe after dark, and they report their quality of life is dropping. Jason Finau is a member of the Brown Caucus, a group created to represent young Māori and Pacific people. He says people are also worried about being priced out of their own town by a government-funded $1.5 billion plan to build 4,000 homes in East Porirua, as well as upgrading parks and redesigning neighbourhoods over the next 25 years.
The Eastern Waters mainly made up, I think, of around 70% Pacific Islander Māori people. And so what they worry about is, issues we've seen in Auckland with gentrification and, housing values soaring up.
He says rates in the city, which have traditionally been higher than in other parts of the Wellington region, are also a worry. Youth worker Joan Buchanan says a comprehensive strategic approach to youth development in Porirua, where nearly 4 out of every 10 people are under 25 years old, is desperately needed.
And the reason it's desperately needed, we need something that has people in agreement of what is important, what are the priorities, and how best we can deal with some very, very significant issues facing the youth of Porirua.
Joan Buchanan says the council's job is to provide leadership and to offer sincere, legitimate engagement. Incumbent Mayor Mike Tana says young people in Porirua have a lot of pressure on them, and while a lot of that is out of the council's control, it needs to respond.
We started doing that report so that we could see what needed to be addressed and changed and considered in our city, and I think that that's what's so neat about this whole process. We do have to look at where we're at regarding children and young people, and then where we find the gaps, we have a plan to make a change.
Councillor and mayoral candidate Anna Coffey says the council has been trying to engage young people by running sessions to let them share their ideas. Ms Coffey says while the council doesn't provide things like mental health services, it needs to be involved in those conversations.
There are definitely some things that our staff are involved with. If I was mayor, I'd be looking to be a lot more involved in some of those conversations and making sure young people are also there to input.
And councillor and fellow mayoral hopeful Anita Baker wants to open a discussion about bringing Māori wardens or something similar back to the city's streets to make them safer.
The council's main priorities are obviously doing the basics, but just to do the basics with the infrastructure and the roading, we still need to hear from the kids what it is they're wanting for them in the future. They know that we need to fix the harbour and all those things, but we need to know what else we can do in the community, and quite often it's just dealing with other groups and working with them.
Deputy Mayor Izzy Ford is also hoping to step up into the top job and says there is always room for improvement in how youth issues are dealt with. She says young people have the solutions and she'd like to see councillors mentor them one-on-one.
Just planting that seed early, so then it's not so foreign and they realise someone like me is someone like you, so you can be in these spaces. I'd love to do that, love to break down the whole barrier of this is only for certain type of people. It's not, it's for anyone.
Voting for local elections has already begun and ends on October the 12th. In Wellington for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney, tēnei.
It's 50 years since the release of the Beatles album Abbey Road, and that musical statement from 1969 is the latest in the band's re-release industry. The re-released 50th anniversary Abbey Road features new and largely unheard material from the recording sessions. And the producer on this particular Beatles re-release, none other than the son of the original producer and so-called fifth Beatle, Sir George Martin. CNN's Neil Curry filed this report.
I get very involved, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Released in 1969 to mixed reviews, but now widely regarded as a classic, the critics then didn't realise that Abbey Road was the last time the Beatles would come together in the studio to record an album.
They still respected and loved each other, but they wrote songs separately.
Here comes the sun.
And George became much more of a strong songwriter for Abbey Road with Here Comes the Sun Something.
Giles Martin has previously remixed the Sgt. Pepper and White albums and spent months listening to tapes of the Abbey Road recording sessions produced by his late father, George Martin, who became known as the fifth Beatle after working on all the band's original albums.
The Beatles experts that know way more than me, I'm pretty useless, claim that the Beatles didn't think it was their last album. My dad always said that he felt that it was.
It got a bit faster, Ringo.
OK, George. I think they knew things were changing. The band knew things were changing. They were becoming more individual. Creative people want to create, they want to do different things, and I think they all want to do different things.
He admits it's often proved to be an emotional experience.
Sometimes it's hard dealing with listening to your father's voice on a tape machine. It's great for me to hear how much he meant to them and how much they mean to him.
New technology allows Martin to enhance the listening experience for fans without trampling on a famous musical legacy. His work received a thumbs up from Paul, Ringo and the widows of John and George.
Paul and Ringo, and indeed Yoko and Olivia, they don't employ me to be safe. They don't want that. The biggest thrill I get is their reaction and pinning Paul or Ringo down and getting them to listen to the album. They'll listen to Come Together, and separately they'll say, I remember this day, we were really good on this day. And if I can bring them closer to that day they recorded it on, that's an achievement well done. We live in a world with Spotify and Amazon and Google and whoever, and there's a global jukebox that kids can listen to all the music in the world, and for them, the Beatles, Duran Duran, Ed Sheeran, whoever it is, are all on the same playlists. And there's no reason why the Beatles shouldn't be as relevant as everyone else.
Giles Martin, the son of original Beatles producer George Martin, ending that report. On that note, have a great evening. That's us.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police have found a cache of firearms and ammunition at a house in the Christchurch suburb of Burnside as they investigate 2 deaths early today. The Transport Ministry is red-faced over submissions opposing the car tax rebate scheme ending up in its spam folder. The Prime Minister has ticked off the Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones for his calls for backing at a forestry conference this month. And the agency in charge of the country's airspace has apologised for the grounding of 36 domestic flights this afternoon.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I was tracking for my island, Tuvalu, for my people and for my culture. I went with my family members, like my uncle, auntie and cousins.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
I'm Sanitary Nick and one of my favourite bands like